Hello everyone. Today on Outreach we're going to be looking at the use of interviews and how we can use interviews to help us learn English. And previously we've done sessions on film, and movies are a really great way to interact with listening to how people speak and listening to how people use vocab. So we're going to be looking at a few examples of interviews and looking at the use of new adjectives and vocabulary. What are interviews? So interviews are a dialogue, and this is another word for conversation. This might be a new vocab that you might have not encountered before, between people, two or more. And we can think of interviews as basically in different situations. So you might have had a formal job interview, or another form of interview is with a guest on a TV show. You might have seen celebrities go on interviews like Jonathan Ross, or you might have seen other interviews like that. And another example is oral history, so that's a recording of someone describing their own life and past. Do you enjoy watching any documentaries or any other forms of interview? If you do, then just think of an example you can list and write down. So, just like films and movies, listening to other people describe their own life and history through oral history might be a good way to help develop English language skills, as it shows how people communicate their ideas to others. So we're going to be looking at some interviews from people talking about the history of cinema and their own experience. So whilst you're watching these clips, I just want you to think about the use of adjectives and any new vocabulary that you might come across. So these are interviews based on the same project, which is looking at the history of film in an area of London called Southall. And these are people describing their experience going to the movies. So this is trying to move on from previous sessions we've looked at the cinema. So I'll just go into the first clip for us all.
Parminder. Okay, so we're here at your house. It is the 2nd of December 2017, and the time is now 11 past 7. I'd just like to start off with asking you about your background.
I was born in Kenya and arrived in England in 1962, where my father had called for us. He arrived here the year before. Where I'm from is a very difficult question. My family on both sides were originally from the Patwa region of what's now Pakistan, and Jilin. My father's family from Jilin, my mum's family from Rawalpindi, and have a very strong identification with that part. So in part I feel I'm from there as well. And then after partition my family moved to different parts of India, mainly Delhi, but also both my grandparents were amongst the first in Kenya. So I have a kind of quadruple identity. But I think that's important also to say, because a lot of South Asians, and certainly in England are like that as well. We have a very mixed ancestry, or we have a very mixed geographical kind of ancestry, but it also means that culturally we cross over to lots of things, including film and cinema, and that's all makes up part of who we are.
So that was a brief description about cinema and why it's important for this woman. And now we're going to skip to another part of the video where we are talking about why films might be important. So remember, we're writing down any new vocab and the use of adjectives that you might not have come across before.
I think the other reason why films are so important for us as South Asians is the music. Music is such an integral part of our lives, anyone's lives, like people listen to music all the time. But I think for us it takes on another dimension, particularly again if you live outside, your homeland. Although It's true of India as well. You go India, Pakistan, anywhere, there's music playing constantly. And films were the main medium of music, unless it was devotional music, or the classical traditions, you know, of going to classical concerts and the bar, but that's really was for an elite, you know, not everyone got to access.
So I'm sorry about this, the internet seems to be going off terribly bad. Yeah, I'm really sorry about this, it should be working anytime soon. Okay, I'm terribly sorry, but that doesn't seem to be working. So unfortunately we can't get this to load up. But basically this interview had a few other use of adjectives, and I've just got a list lower down of some of the examples. So if your internet is better than mine, maybe just go over these times and have a look at the extracts from the interview. We're just going to talk about some new, well, it's not essential at the moment, we're just going to talk about some new vocabulary and adjectives that come across in this interview and why it might be helpful. So here's just a list of some of the words that you might have not come across. So in terms of new vocab, identification, what does this mean? This means like relating to how you understand something. So I identify with a particular film or a particular idea. Cultural, this relates to the idea of music, art and other activities, architecture. So cultural is opposed to other things, so for example economic. Quadruple, quad is anything relating to fours. So you have tri, which is triplets. Quadruple is a word that comes up in this, and that just means four-way. Identity, which relates to your sense of being on who you are. So your particular identity might be I come from this particular group or this area. Ancestry, ancestry relates to your family history and the background that you come from. Geographically, that's relating to space and a particular area. So geography is the study of space and place. This word comes up in the interview. Consummated, which means to begin or to start, is quite a posh word for that, but it's quite a useful one that might come up in the future. So consummated is relating to beginning or starting something. Next we've got convey, and another word for that is to express. So you can express something or get a particular idea across. So in the clip she's talking about films and they convey a particular period or particular idea. A medium. So medium has two meanings and in English. The first one, medium, is like middle size. So we can have small, medium and large. But in this context, this is relating to culture. So a medium is the form of artwork that they're talking about, and this they're talking about cinema. So cinema is the medium that they're using. Classic, which just kind of means traditional, or an early classic example is a typical thing. So you have classical architecture or other classical music. Traditions are particular activities or events or processes that go on that are historic, so have gone on through the past. An elite, these are people who are high up in society and people who have a particular status. Acknowledge, which means to accept or understand something, or say, so I've acknowledged that you've given me the right answer to a question. Caliber, and this relates to how we can discuss a certain level. So if something's of a high caliber, then it is of a good quality. So it's talking about the quality. This one's quite complicated. Symbiotic. Symbiotic is a word that means a relationship between two things that is natural and beneficial. So it's a positive if you have two things. So a symbiotic relationship between two friends is an example. Geniuses, so that relates to someone who's very clever. Geniuses is like the plural of this. Anticipation. The anticipation is when you're expecting something and you're a bit concerned about it. Cassette, we've had this relating to the past example that Mohi talked about with the film and cinema, and a cassette is a thing that you used to record things on. Next up we're going to look at adjectives that came up in this. Unfortunately we couldn't hear the whole video, but talking about particular adjectives, and in the video she talks about it was magic, so going to the cinema was magic. What does this mean? Now magic relates to sort of things that are fantastical or imagined. She also used the word bomb, the boom, bang, which is not a particularly typical adjective, but it's used in this context to mean she really enjoyed going to the cinema. The cinema was bomb, the boom, bang. Intrinsic, which means something that is internal or essential or key to something. So she talks about the music was an intrinsic part of this film. So intrinsic kind of means a key element or key component. Integral, which is relating to intrinsic. Integral means is also a core element of something. And symbiotic is another adjective that we've had in the new vocab. Okay, so next up we've got another video where somebody else is talking about the same series, which is discussing the history of film in that particular area of London, and we're going to hear about his experience of film. And I want you to just write down or think about the use of adjectives and unfamiliar vocab. Right, I'm really sorry, this does not seem to be working. I think something might have crashed for some reason. I'm really sorry. Okay, so again, this video, unfortunately we can't hear it today, but it's basically talking about this guy's experience of film as well. And in it, he talks about the use of, we're going to also discuss the use of adjectives on any unfamiliar vocab. So, some of the vocab that we've had previously covered by Mohi's session on film, we looked at a cameraman or a woman, which is somebody who operates a camera, someone that does the filming. Next up we've got interior. Now when he's using this, he's talking about the interior of a cinema. So he says the cinema was old, it had red chairs in it, it was wooden and dusty. And another word is frequently, and this relates to time. So it means often. If something happens frequently, it happens, say, every day. So they frequently played films at this cinema. And new adjectives that come across in this clip, and again I'm really sorry that it's not working, I have no idea why, because the live streams should be working, but for some reason this browser isn't working. It was working a minute ago. So some of the adjectives that they use: really lovely. Lovely is just another way of saying really pleasant or nice or friendly. And he also talks about the chairs, which are related to the interior, as being red-ish. Now this isn't in the dictionary, but it's kind of a colloquialism, and you can add ish onto a lot of words. So if something's reddish or bluish, it's a shade of that colour. So reddish or dark reddish, and you can just say that if you're not sure about how the colour was, if it's not an exact colour. So for example, this is just like a normal red, but if I change the colour to something around here, it's sort of reddish. Slightly different to a bolder red. So next word we've got sculpted, which relates to sculpture, and they're using it, he was using it in relation to the interior again. So he was saying the cinema was sculpted in a certain way, and sculptures are statues of people, so you can say something is sculpted a particular way. The other next adjective is preserved. So again they were talking about the film and how it was well preserved, which means it's been kept well. You can talk about preserved mummies, which are dead people wrapped up, so they've been kept in a state which keeps them preserved so they don't go off and decay. Next adjective is popular, which you've probably come across, which just relates to something being very common and well liked and well received. Next adjective, or adverb in this case, is interestingly that comes up. So he describes it as interestingly they played a particular kind of film. Next up, the word they use is funniest. So this film was the funniest film that they watched on that particular session. And the next adjective that was used was silly. So silly is something that's humorous or funny or hilarious in a particular way. And there's one style of film that it relates to Charlie Chaplin, and that's called, I forgot what it's called, but silly is kind of slapstick, that's the word. So slapstick humour relates to that. The next adjective we've got is active, something that is very mobile, is going along quickly. So I'm really sorry that the videos themselves are not working. Just try one more time. Okay, so in your own time, if you do have internet access, you can have a look at these videos, and you can even look through the whole ones. You don't have to look at this particular timings that I've put through, and you can just have a look about how they kind of describe their experience. And I'm really sorry about that, it's not working. So there's some of the adjectives that are used. Now I want you to kind of remember these. So finally, this one should work because it is not a YouTube link, it's a direct audio. So here's another example of an interview, and I tried to pick one that was relating to medicine, and this is an interview about a woman whose father, Maurice Hilleman, developed a vaccine for mumps, and you can find it via this link here. So he did this by putting swabs in, which are kind of like a test where you get a cotton bud on a stick and you put it in your mouth or nose area, and you put it on a petri dish, which is a little plastic circular dish, and this grows bacteria, which are germs, and it helps tests that can be carried out onto the virus. He found that the flu mutates, and so that the flu mutates, and so they had to create new vaccines. So basically, yeah, this is his speech that he's talking about, and this is the daughter of this.
After putting his daughter to bed,
I want you to think about in the comprehension sections. First of all, when did the doctor start working? What did the doctor use to measure the disease? And what effects can mumps potentially have on people?
Dr. Hilleman.
And you can write this in the chat, or you can write it down on whatever resources you have available.
After putting his daughter to bed, Dr. Hilleman sprung into action.
He ran out to the lab in the middle of the night, actually, and he came back home with a swab and a petri dish. And the swab was a long stick with a cotton on the end of it that he then used to gather the mucus from the back of my throat. So they stick it in, and it's quite unpleasant. They took the culture, and then you wipe it on the petri dish, and it allows whatever is in there to grow.
Dr. Hilleman was certain his daughter had the mumps. What he didn't know was what strain she had. Some forms of mumps are relatively harmless, but others infect the brain and spinal cord, causing aseptic meningitis and even hearing loss.
Okay, so that was an example which we actually got to hear this time, which is somebody talking about their experience of working on a vaccine for mumps. So, looking at the examples from the comprehension questions, when did the doctor start working? It was the middle of the night. So he got up and he was very excited and agitated, and he felt like he had to do this discovery. What was used to measure the virus? And it was a swab, which was basically, as I explained before, a cotton bud on the end of a stick. And we have similar tests today for other diseases. And what can the mumps cause? So mumps can cause other infections. One of them is called meningitis, which is a disease which causes red rash, hearing loss, and potentially spinal difficulties. So there are some of the issues that can come up from that video. And unfortunately the lesson would have gone on for a lot longer had the videos been going, so I'm sorry it's been cut short. So for your homework, I'd like you to write a response from an imaginary interviewee. An interviewee is somebody who is being interviewed. So you can make up your own character, and the context is similar to the first two videos. So the first two videos would have been talking about the history of film. So imagine you are someone who's being interviewed about your experience of film and going to the movies. And I want you to write a brief description of your character that's being interviewed. And this can be their background, history, and we can add that word, maybe ancestry as well before. So write a brief description of them. Now, these are the imaginary questions you're going to have to answer for your interviewee. Number 1, could you tell me about your early life? Number 2, describe your favourite film and the first time you watched it. Why is it your favourite film? So in these questions you can think about their early life, their background, where they moved to, where they lived, who their family and friends were, what they did at school or where they travelled to. The second question, you could describe the characters in the film, when you first watched it, and what this experience was like. Why is it your favourite film? So you can talk about the whole host of reasons for why it might be. And I want you to try and use some of these new words we came across here. At least 5 of the new vocab and 5 of the new adjectives that we use. And finally, just as the same with movies, have a listen online to any interviews with particular people and think of an example that you found that was really helpful in your both understanding of English, both written and spoken, and just email those to the N.E.S.T Outlook address. So again, I'm really sorry about the troubles we had with that, but yeah, that's